There is no objective way to rank government systems. To determine which system is the quote-unquote best is to determine which color is the best, or which religion is the best, or which sport is the best. The fact of the matter is that the place of democracy over all other forms of government is a biased and partial choice. Everybody has their own perspective on how to effectively run a country. For example, a conservative is more likely to choose a monarchy over a democracy, and a utilitarian is more likely to pick a democracy over a monarchy. And so the purpose of the speech is not to prove how democracy is superlative, nor is it to prove how democracy is the worst method of governing a nation. Rather, it serves to prove how democracy doesn't deserve either of these titles. To start, let's analyze the demagoguery in democracy and the inadequate education of voters. First of all, there's no such thing as pure objectivity in regards to humans, and if you are purely objective, please see a therapist. The truth is that most, if not all, humans are influenced by emotions, by feelings, by opinions, and by subjective factors. What this means is that no matter the decision, there will always be an element of personal preference that exists. Furthermore, we also judge based on first impressions, even when we say we don't. The fact is, I'm going to like someone that is more charming and agreeable rather than someone that is cold and blunt. Secondly then, the average voter has very little political knowledge. Not everyone understands how to run a country. Not everyone knows what's best for their country, and not everyone has political expertise. This political ignorance, alongside the intrinsic bias that people have, result in the population voting for what they want rather than what they need. This is why 46% of Americans say they want Dwayne Johnson as their president, a great actor, but someone that doesn't know how to run a country. Finally then, people are selfish. The same reason why people don't vote for long-term prosperity is the same reason why people won't stop eating meat, because most people care for short-term benefits over long-term investments. And this is especially apparent in democratic elections, as voters will vote for what helps them now rather than what helps the country later. This inherent selfishness, alongside personal bias and political ignorance, means that people aren't making educated decisions when voting. And why is this bad? Democratic elections are a fundamental part of a country's government. They determine how a country is going to be run for the next few years. Consequently, the decisions that voters have to make bears extreme significance. So you might think that the average voter will be impartial and objective when voting for a party. However, this often isn't the case. The majority of voters would rather vote for a political candidate that is more charismatic than a candidate that actually pushes for good policies. Because as humans, we inherently like people that are sociable and say the things that we want to hear. As a result, politicians can easily take advantage of this partiality and the disparity in political knowledge amongst the public to gain popularity without actually pushing for good policies, as most voters are not going to extensively analyze their political ideology and are likely just going to vote on whether or not they give a good speech. This also means that anyone can become a politician as long as they can quote-unquote sound good without needing any prior political knowledge, as the public is just as oblivious as they are. Take Huey Long for an example. He was a popular political figure in the 1920s that proposed an ambitious goal of distributing wealth to lower class individuals. I'm not criticizing his plan, however the fact of the matter is that Huey relied on populist rhetoric to oversimplify the details of his endeavor. He exemplifies demagoguery because he focuses more on saying what the voters want rather than saying what the voters need. This is why he was popular among the general public and infamous among critics, because critics were able to see past his superficial glazing and saw that his plan lacked feasibility in many areas. The hard truth of democracy is that it is a popularity game. People vote for candidates that say the right things rather than do the right things simply because they are uninformed and human. And when politicians take advantage of this fact, it leads to lackluster, ineffective, short-sighted, and manipulative governments. Second contention, then, is that democracy puts all the power in the majority. First of all, the fundamental rule of democracy is that the government must represent the public. This is intuitive, but just to elaborate, democratic governments are picked by the majority. This means that whatever social group, belief, or ideology is predominant will be the one that decides how an election will go. This is why in America, there are some states that are always going to vote for one political party, because the majority of that state agrees with that political party's ideology, thus making it near impossible for them to change their vote. Moreover, politicians want to win, and to do so, they will appeal to the majority. The fact is that if I'm a political candidate for my next presidential election, I want to garner the most votes. So tell me, would I rather appeal to the minority or the majority? Obviously the majority, because that's where most of the voters are. And what this creates is a feedback loop, where politicians will only ever appeal to the majority, and the minority is constantly underrepresented, marginalized, and oppressed. And without other cultures, countries will lose diversity, equality, and social cohesion, as different cultural groups will constantly be separated from one another. And you cannot say that representative democracy solves this issue by having multiple representatives, simply because even if a minority group gains a seat in parliament, they're still going to be overshadowed by the majority 90% of the time. Now, I've talked a lot about the flaws in democracy. However, democracy isn't all terrible like I characterized earlier. First of all, it's able to hold governments and politicians accountable. Unlike single-party governments or dictatorships, the public actually has a say in how a country is going to be run. If I'm in office, I can't just start doing whatever I want. I still have to appeal to the majority and act in the best interest of the public, as if I don't, I decrease the likelihood of being re-elected. Citizens under dictatorships don't have this luxury, as they have no say in the decision-making process and are essentially powerless in respect to how their country is going to be run. If you don't believe me, take a look at North Korea, a dictatorship that is infamous for its poor living conditions as a result of an ignorant government that isn't accountable to anyone. Secondly, democracies also have higher degree of representation. Although democracies place all the power in the majority, it still represents the public better than some other forms of government. Since the people have a say in how a country will be run, the government must reflect the interests of the people, something that many other governments don't do. Overall, despite the glaring issues with democracy, such as the lack of political expertise among voters, it still has a few decent pros, such as higher public accountability and better representation, even if some minorities are underrepresented. And for these reasons, democracy is still the intuitive form of government that most people will turn to, but it isn't the best. For these reasons, proud to propose.